This week on The Futurists, Lisa Bodell.
What really makes us human a lot of times is struggle.
Yeah.
And if all these struggles just keep getting taken away and we have all this leisure time, what are we going to do?
Well, welcome back to The Futurists. I am your host, Brett King. I'm flying solo today. Rob is probably dealing with riots in Los Angeles still. I don't know how that's going, actually, but, it's going to be a fun show. Today we're getting into a little bit more methodology around super forecasting. We have a great guest. She comes from, an advertising and marketing and content background. She's the founder and CEO of a company called FutureThink, established back in 2003. She's written a couple of books: Kill the Company, End the Status Quo, Start an Innovation Revolution. It was awarded Best Business Book of the Year in 2014. And Why Simple Wins, Escaping the Complexity Trap and Get to Work That Matters. She's done a ton of speaking. She's done work with brands like Google, Citigroup, Novartis, Department of National Intelligence, did work on the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council. Lisa Bodell, welcome to The Futurists.
Oh, Brett, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And you're based in the state of New York?
I'm in New York. I'm not a native New Yorker, but I've been here now for 25 years. So I consider myself a New Yorker now.
I think, isn't it like after 15 years or so, you sort of qualify? I mean, I did 12 years. I don't consider myself a New Yorker, but I knew the rules.
I think for you and I both, we don't have the accent yet, but as soon as we do, we can turn it on when we want. But now I'm actually coming to you from my home office outside of New York, and we have our offices, I was telling you, in the Chrysler Building, because I always want that little kind of like dopamine hit of New York. I love being able to go out on my patio, but getting into the city, there's just that adrenaline rush that I really love. So I plan on staying for a while.
How is New York feeling these days? I was there during the pandemic. Of course, it was a pretty rough period, but, how's it feel these days? Does it feel like it's come back?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on where you go. Midtown's still a little dead just because people aren't fully back to office, and they probably won't be. Right. But certainly down below 14th Street, if you get into Chelsea and West Village and Soho and Tribeca, they're hopping. I mean, good luck getting a restaurant reservation anywhere. So if we all can predict better, use AI to predict better how to get restaurant reservations, that will be gold in New York City. It's great. I invite everybody to come. It's booming.
I do wonder as a futurist what we're going to do with all of this commercial office space. I mean, firstly, I think, the working from home movement is a lifestyle approach now. And increasingly, as AI gives us more freedom and flexibility, that's only going to get, stronger. And the likelihood of getting people back in the office, I think we're going to see that this is, the pandemic was the start of the end, and AI is going to probably accelerate that. But, how do we utilize all of that commercial office space? Are we going to rezone it as housing or something? I don't know. I sort of think about that. The buildings weren't built for that, of course, But it's interesting to sort of contemplate, because otherwise you're just going to have a lot of empty buildings sometime in the future.
Yeah. I mean, they've been talking about that for a while, that there'll be a reckoning in commercial real estate when finally all the large contracts come up, which is now. Right. But, from a humane standpoint, it should be low income housing, because that's the problem, not just in New York, but in most city centers, right? London feels the same. Tokyo feels the same. So everyone that is working can't afford to live near where they work. And it's just creating this lifestyle havoc. So there are some places that are turning commercial office buildings into housing, but it's always in New York, it's luxury housing. So we have incredible luxury housing for people that want to park their money here. Right. But they don't live in them. They're still empty buildings. So, I mean, my vote would be affordable housing. I think that would solve a lot of social and economic issues. Let's see what happens.
Absolutely. So, you've done a fair bit of work the last 20 years or so with FutureThink, and, you've worked with a lot of different organizations. But, your key message in your books and the work you've done with FutureThink is really about simplicity.
That's right.
But, are we coming to, this greatest period of automation that creates simplicity? Or, is the very fact that AI, based on the fact that it's deeply technical, does that introduce more complexity initially before we can get to the simplicity? How do you see that as sort of a tool set when you're working with corporations that are trying to make this shift?
So, especially as someone who's an expert in simplicity, people always ask me, does technology help us or hurt us? Right? Does it make things more complicated or more simplified? And the answer is yes.
Yeah,
It's both.
exactly.
The problem is what happens is we overuse it or we use it in the wrong way. Like just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I guess what I'm getting at is I don't want people to look at simplicity just as the end game, but it's a tool. So it's a great tool when you're managing chaos. And that's really where we are. So let me just get to that point, which is right now, I think the issue is we're at this inflection point of rapid change with AI, for example. That's really the biggest driving force. And people become very unmoored with change, especially rapid change, especially change that is threatening to their jobs, to their livelihood. Yes, it can automate, but for some people, that means they're out of a job. I think the upside, this is me as, I'm a positive futurist, is it has never been more important to have the human skills that partner with AI, right? Looking at it as a coach and a partner, a coworker, rather than a replacement. And what I mean by that, my bias is having a learning company for 20 years now is, the human skills that AI can't really do well yet. I probably spend, oh my God, I'm at least on AI for at least 12 hours a day, at least as a writer, as a thought leader. It still can't even write properly for me. So I'm not really ready for it to take over the world. But for human skills, right, collaboration, creative problem solving, cultural nuance, creative writing, it's not there yet. It's just not. I spent yesterday, my company will produce over 500 learning courses this year, many of them focused on AI and many of them with AI coaching models. And we weave in AI prompts and everything to our learning. I'm telling you this because the future goes to the people who know how to ask the best questions, who can write the best prompts. So how do I feel about technology? I think it's going to be great. It's already helping me in so many ways speed up things, and it's not replacing me yet, but that's because I have human-centered skills. So people that are doing things that are rote, that are replaceable, that are repeatable, yeah, they should be nervous. But that's their opportunity to upskill to something more in terms of soft skills.
Well, the New York Times published a piece just a couple of days ago, I think, on all of the jobs that are going to be created by AI.
Yeah.
Which I think is definitely true of every technological revolution that we see. But at the same time, I'm also very conscious of the fact that we the very intent behind AI is to remove humans out of the workforce, right? Robot taxis, robot delivery vehicles, robotic factories. That seems to be a pretty clear intent.
But I would argue, though, that, and that's a good thing, for things that are just kind of, they're certainly not meaningless.
Yeah.
They're more robotic and repeatable. Yeah, we should do that. Same thing with the age of industrial AI. Like, I don't think anyone still wants to be riding horses, right? So, this is just a new adaptation.
Cleaning chimneys. Yeah.
Or cleaning chimneys. We can all use those examples, right? But so I think that that's a good thing, that it can actually free up time for more meaningful work. And that's where I go, which is, my focus is on, I focus on transformation in terms of managing chaos. That's why I'm a futurist. There's a structured way to manage change and chaos. And how you do that, in my opinion, is through simplified methods. So AI simplifies a lot of things. It gets rid of the unnecessary, the unmanageable, the unmeaningful, to free me up for more meaningful work. So I look at that as a positive thing. So yeah, I might not be driving my car, but that's going to free me up time to do other things that would have just been wasted. So that's how I want people to look at it. I think, we'll talk about this, Brett, but I think one of the issues is just human fear against the unknown. And if we can get people more comfortable with the positive side of the unknown and focus in their sphere of control, that's what simplicity does, they'll have a sense of, it's about getting clarity and control. That's the best thing you can do during change, is clarity and control. Futurists are particularly good at that. And I think that's what, this is just another instance of this with AI. Help give people clarity and control.
So I see fairly consistently in the media you've done and the writing you've done, and you've got a lot of content out there, so props to you. But I see two sort of messages sort of keep coming up again. One is that you've used the term, I think, sort of real futurists use scenario planning. So I want to talk about your structured approach to scenario planning, and I also want to talk about how you look at this sort of kill the stupid rules, right? Because that's another thing that you say repetitively. So let's start with the kill the stupid rules, and then talk about how that sits in a scenario planning framework.
It's tied to it. I mean, I think what you just talked about sphere of control, right? And I said, people, when we think about change, the thing that overwhelms people is that they think it's going to be more. It's going to be overwhelming. They want to have control over it. And the way that you give people a sense of control is to make sure that they focus on less. And so that's where kill a stupid rule comes in. I say to people, especially when leaders are having a transformation, the first thing people hear is, oh my God, more work. And I'll say, well, then let's make space for that work. So let's get rid of the stuff that's not working, right? So, work and processes and, things in our life are like weeds. We have to weed the garden for the good plants to grow. Kill a stupid rule really gets teams together and says, hey, let's challenge how we work. Let's do it better. Let's get rid of the things that aren't working. So Brett, if you could kill any two rules at work that hold you back, I bet you could come up with at least two that you would like to get rid of or stop doing. And when I did that with Pfizer, for example, I did it with a team right when Albert became their CEO, and he was focused on simplicity for speed, right? It's a competitive advantage. You can't have speed if you're drowning in complexity. He said, come in and kill a stupid rule with my top 800 people. And I did. And in less than an hour, we identified thousands of rules and got rid of, what they estimated in less than an hour, $250,000 of wasted money and thousands of hours of wasted time. And the most interesting thing when you do kill a stupid rule, Brett, is, first of all, it energizes people. I mean, they are pumped to kill stupid rules. And then second,
you have a lot of stupid rules in human society.
So much stupidity. Yeah. So much stupidity, right? But
as you were talking, I was just thinking about like the justice system. How many laws are stupid laws, and how we got laws on the books going back hundreds of years. All of that complexity just seems completely unnecessary. But how do you have sort of a judicial review process where you can simplify all of that, right? Because it takes laws, and that's pretty complex to get in place, right?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, because one thing I do say is, and I'll tell you the aha, some rules are necessary. Some complexity is purposeful. Like, I don't want anybody to operate on me. I need someone to go to medical school. I need someone to go to flight school and fly a plane. That's necessary. But the unnecessary stuff is what kill a stupid rule gets rid of. And what you find, like the Pfizer example is, they came up with, thousands of things they wanted to get rid of. They're all common themes, meetings, emails, reports. Most of those aren't rules. It's just no one ever thought about getting rid of something, because we build our value, Brett, around more volume, not valuable. And that's a strategic
capital
shift.
Output. Yeah.
That's right. So I think that's a good way to manage the future. And complexity is AI can be your friend in that. It can help you get rid of the unnecessary so you can focus on the meaningful. That's the goal.
All right, so let's talk about scenario planning and your forecasting methodology. Do you have specific school of thoughts, or how have you developed your approach to scenario planning, and where does that fit? Because, you can go in and attack stupid rules, but some rules today might seem like they make sense, but in this future setting, in the world that we're going to, they're not going to make a lot of sense. Like, we need to have a signature on a piece of paper so we have a legal record of your compliance, right? That doesn't make any sense in the new world, right?
There's so many things. I was talking about this with my kid. I have 2 adult children. And the fact that when they were younger, I wanted to make sure that they knew how to write checks, even write, by the way. We have an EV car. They haven't been to a gas station in 2 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's different. They'll be self-healing tires, all the things that you think they need to be able to do, that'll be different. But anyway, that's why you need to instill skills and ethics, not just tactics and outcomes. So scenario planning. The thing about scenario planning to me is that, as a futurist, there are many futures. We can control the future. And I want to prepare people so they can shape it, not react to it. And that's why tying back to chaos and simplicity is so important, because right now people are thinking of agility and resilience in terms of reacting to change. I don't want my team to just react to change. I want them to shape it. Simplicity lets them do that. You go on offense with simplicity. And so when it comes to strategic planning, I get very provocative about it. I think, again, we do things the same way we've always done it, which is like SWOT analyses. And my joke is that that's political theater, right? Strength. I have so many strengths and weaknesses. Well, they're not really weaknesses. We fall into these traps. And so my approach to strategic planning is killing your company. And I wrote a book called Kill the Company. And the approach is, if you were your number one competitor, how would you put yourself out of business? What are all the ways you do it? How do you practice proactive obsolescence? And what scenarios do those create and free you up for a much stronger future around who you're becoming, not just who you are? And that is a key exercise people need to do before strategic planning. It's cathartic, it's transformative, and it's structured. So it helps people think about strategic planning in a structured, kind of unshackled way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's great, because it creates potentially can create quite an interesting culture internally in terms of experimentation and sort of knowing that, you're not defending for what you've built in the past, that you've got to, work on new approaches, right?
Yeah. Well, most of, this as a futurist, most futures are built on extrapolations, assumptions grounded in the present.
Trending analysis, et cetera. Yep.
Yeah. Or they just do 3 horizons, whatever it might be. And all of those are very good. However, a lot of that is incremental and it's assumptive. So the only way companies are really going to get those far-reaching, even short-term scenarios for the future is to really challenge your assumptions and disrupt. So that's what Kill the Company does, is say, let's make space for what you could be, not just based on who you are. And it is astounding to me how much good thinking there is that is untapped within executive suites. And it's untapped and locked up due to fear, due to politics, and due to a lack of a structured approach to do it. SWOT analysis aren't going to get you there. 3 horizon analysis, they're not going to get you there. Futurist approaches, right? Like Kill the Company or Futures Wheels, that has to be baked into strategic planning. I wish all strategic planners were like, what Shell has. They're futurists. And I think that's really important.
Well, Shell really sort of developed the whole scenario planning methodology, really. We had some of them on the show in the past.
Yeah. Great.
When we look at the complexity of business today, how does the speed of business and the real-time component change, organizational approaches to simplicity? Because if you're automating and you're trying to automate existing processes, robotic process automation, or you're trying to look at agentic AI, for example, right now, you could bake in the stupidity. So how do you how do you deal with it from that? Yeah. So when you're doing that sort of planning about how to build in automation and how to, prevent obsolescence, at the same time, you want to make sure that, you're not building in stuff that in the future is going to be a problem for you, right?
Well, that's where being good about prompting matters. And being provocative about killing things. So I think we don't just look at futures as positive, we also look at them as the negative as well, right? What could happen, what changes. So, one of the things I wanted to say about that is, I think for a lot of companies, if we're building in the future around AI, for example, I would want to have, I would give people in terms of strategic planning, the top 20 prompts that they have to have, and they have to ask AI in terms of coming up with new agendas. What would happen if we did this? What would happen if we didn't do this? What are the implications I'm not thinking of? So, and let me give you an example. Here, there's the unintended consequences that we want people to start thinking about. Let's take oil and energy. In fact, let's take Shell. And what was really interesting when they were asking the question, what if in the future we don't extract energy, we grow it? And that's a really interesting question because they don't have to do that. I mean, there's so much energy that, we'll be long dead before we run out of oil reserves. But by doing that, that forced them to invest not just in different companies, right? Green energy, et cetera, but different people. Because what they realized was that means you hire very different people for the future. And what I mean by that is they're not just geoscientists, they're bioscientists. And the issue there, Brett, that they realized was there's not enough of them going through schools in the world. So our HR strategy, right? We have to steal them. And my
find a way to retrain people or create inflow at universities and scholarships. And it's not
right.
It's not easy.
Yeah, but what that does, it creates new competitive clashes that you didn't expect, which means, oil and energy companies now are stealing bioscientists from pharma. And oil and energy are probably one of the few industries that have more money than pharma. And pharma wasn't thinking about that. So if you're not thinking that way, right, in terms of not just who can we acquire, what other products can we come up with, but what skills do we need, you're going to get caught with your hands down. And that's a skill issue. That's also a speed issue, which is what you're asking about. It's no longer about scale. It's about speed. And AI is going to give you both. That's the game changer.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I do want to talk about, getting into the future and what do you think the future is going to look like and how, what a corporation is going to look like in the future. But before we get to that, before we get to our break, we do this little thing on the show where we have our lightning round just to get to know you a bit better for our listeners. So let's take a shot at the lightning round.
Oh my
Lisa,
God. Okay.
They're not difficult questions, but let's try and keep it short and punchy. Yeah, it's all right. What was the first depiction, science fiction or futurism that you remember being exposed to in media?
When I was younger, a future toy catalog. And this is when I was 7. And it really set me on fire because I'm a very creative thinker and I like avant-garde things. And I saw that and I was like, toys of the future, what does that mean? And this is when I was like the Jetsons. So that was cool for me.
So tell me, age 7, that's apparently when you started your own rock painting business as well, I understand, right?
You've really done your research. That's the creative and entrepreneurial side of me. I mean, what a neighbor isn't going to say yes to a 7-year-old trying to sell painted rocks to them for 25 cents? So yeah,
absolutely. There you go. All right. So is there a future you think has most changed humanity for the good or worse?
Well, I think we're going through it right now with AI. That's what I think. I think the other thing I think is the human genome mapping. I think that is a tremendously transformative thing that is going to take off with the power of AI in ways we don't even know yet. And it could be dramatically positive for us in terms of disease preventing it before it even happens.
Yeah, let's just write those bugs out of our genome, right? Absolutely. Right. We had Andrew Hessel on. We've had him on a couple of times. It's always great to talk about that. So, but there's a lot happening in that space right now. All right, name a futurist or an entrepreneur that has influenced you and why.
Yeah, you know what? This is going to be obscure, but I'm going to name 2 people, Gary Golden and Andy Hines. And these are people that started at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. I'd put Peter Bishop in there too. That they were the first people I ever met that were futurists, and I didn't even know this was a world that existed. They taught at University of Houston, Clear Lake and started the Foresight program. And they are really into teaching people the future. And what really blew my mind about that was I didn't know you could do that. And I didn't know that was a job. And when it opened up a whole new world for me. And I'm very grateful for them doing that.
Do you still get that today? I get it. People go, I didn't even know you could be, I didn't even know futurist was a job. I still get that today, actually.
Yeah. And I talk about that a lot too, because it's not, you don't get to work as someone who did work at an ad agency and call yourself a futurist. Trend spotting is not futuring. And so I think it's important to talk about foresight as a practice because it is very important. And, we need more of it in schools, which is something.
And every company, I think, needs a futurist as well. All right, last question before the break. Is there a science fiction story or some depiction of the future that's most representative of the future you hope for?
I do not read science fiction.
Okay.
I think too much of life today is science fiction.
True.
So with all the chaos. So
I
look at more of the near future. But no, I don't have one that I read on a regular basis.
Great. Well, that's it for the lightning round. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm with Lisa Bodell. Be right back. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. Welcome back to The Futurists. I am your host, Brett King. I'm sitting in Dubai today doing this while Lisa is in New York, Lisa Bodell. We've been talking about her business, FutureThink, some of the clients she worked with in the past, including the likes of Pfizer and Google and others. Lisa, as sort of we get into this, given that you are now sort of coaching organizations on simplicity, killing the company, killing complexity, all of those sort of things. In your experience, what are the types of corporations that are the best at adapting? Because, we see the sort of world of AI right now, and even massive players who, became massively successful in the past, are not necessarily guaranteed to play in this world of the future unless they adapt, because the rules around AI are going to change dramatically. For example, in healthcare, we've talked about that in the first half. Healthcare is going to be AI driven, data driven. It's going to be genomic application. It's going to be personalized medicine, things like that. None of which the current FDA approach to mass medicine creation and sort of, doctors and diagnostics are going to work in this future. The same could be said of the legal industry. The same could be said of financial services, of transportation, etc. Yeah. So,
all the things.
This is a period of adaptation, right? Yeah,
it is. But we always find new problems. So, you brought up something that's really interesting, which is, entire industries are going to be decimated, and we're going to need to find, because we're human, we're going to find something different to worry about. Let me give you an example. So we don't have drivers anymore. Everything's autonomous. And the truck drivers, which we now so desperately need, suddenly we won't need any of them. What will they do?
Yeah.
Or said a different way, you know what? No one needs to learn how to drive a car, because the cars will drive themselves. And we don't need to worry about drunk driving laws, because it won't matter. I can drink in the car. I'm not going to worry about my grandparents getting behind the wheel if they don't have good eyesight, because they're not going to get behind the wheel. And because there's not going to be accidents anymore, you know what? We're going to have roads where there's no such thing as car insurance. So complete things.
Right.
We're going to
Our grandkids are going to go, Grandma Lisa, did you really drive a car by yourself?
Exactly. And I'll say, hell yeah, I did. Let me show you. So there's let's do it right now. But it's those kinds of things. We'll find something new to worry about. And so that's where we get into things of now it's more about data protection, likeness, right? Is that a real person or an AI? I think it's going to redefine what it means to be human. I mean, we're already seeing right now, I think mental health is going to take a big hit for a while, because what does it mean to be human, especially when we already know people that use AI coaches in terms of training or online, they prefer using AI to learn versus a personal coach, because with personal coaches, they don't really say what they're thinking because they're embarrassed. But with AI, they go right into it, almost like a therapist or a friend or even romantic relationships. So I think those are the kind of human connections. I look at the psychology and cultural side of futuring are going to redefine what it means to be human. What is human? Do we trust humans more or less? How do we protect our interactions with AI so it's not used in bad ways or embarrassing ways? I also think it's going to make us have a bigger search for meaning. Because what really makes us human a lot of times is struggle.
Yeah.
And if all these struggles just keep getting taken away and we have all this leisure time, what are we going to do? There's only so much. I think satisfaction comes from overcoming things, from doing things, from rising to occasions. And when everything is frictionless, I think that makes people feel unnecessary. And I'm going to be really curious to see how that plays out in terms of our search for meaning.
It's interesting you talked about meaningful work. I had Dave Shapiro on a few months ago, talking about the meaning economy and the fact that, we will do jobs with real meaning and purpose because that's all that's going to be left. The production of widgets and the running of societies will be automated. But, I wrote about this in The Rise of Technosocialism, my last sort of futurist book.
Yes.
And in that, thank you. I'm honored to hear that. But I talked about the fact that when someone asks you in 20 years' time, what do you do? The answer will not be related in any way to your commercial existence, right? Or your financial existence. When you answer that in 20 years' time, it'll be what you find meaningful, right? Because, we'll have UBI or our basic needs will be looked after by this autonomous infrastructure.
God willing. Yeah.
Yeah. Inshallah, as they say out here, right? But this is sort of interesting because if the robots are doing all of the dirty, dangerous, and sort of monotonous stuff, then I think there's going to be a ton of work in human adaptation, right? People who are like, I can't drive a truck anymore. What am I going to do? And you're going to need to have
I'll put all those people to
counseling and stuff. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about climate.
I'll pivot them to climate change. I mean, there are a lot of big problems to be solved.
I think one of the biggest industries on the planet in the 2040s is going to be climate mitigation for sure.
Me too. And I think that is meaningful work. So that's an interesting thing where it could really come together.
It's interesting. I've never met a futurist who's a climate denier. Do you know any?
I don't know that I have either, because I would find it hard to believe that you could be a futurist and be a climate denier.
Yeah, because it's just it's about the plausible futures, right? So you have to count that in. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because I that's one of the reasons I think I really enjoy being with futurists, because they live in the possible. They live in the potential, and they don't discount. It might only have a 5% probability, but we have to consider it. And so I really they seem to be more open, creative, and forward looking. And those are the people I want to spend my time with. Anyone that says that they know things for certain is not in my lane.
This is one of the greatest reasons why I run the podcast. Why Robert and I started the Futurist podcast, because we like hanging out with futurists. We like talking about the future, so it gives us an excuse every week to do that. And in doing so, we learn as well, right? So,
well, Brett, it's so funny. I say to everybody, they're like, "You're a futurist. What does that mean?" And I said, I belong to the coolest and loneliest clubs in the world. I mean, when I belong to the APF, the Association of Professional Futurists, or the World Future Society, everyone's like, those are a thing. I'm like, oh, they're a thing. And they're full of wonderful, crazy people, geeky people. They have jobs and titles you've never heard of before. And I love that. I learned things that I didn't even know were happening. And to me, that's where the real magic comes from. So it's, you were talking about what are the best organizations of the future? They're the people that are the most curious and ask the best questions. Yeah. They're the ones that are going to kill it with prompts. They're going to be great.
So I've got a good futurist joke for you, which is, what's the definition of a futurist?
Tell me.
It means never being wrong today.
I'm proud to be a futurist.
There you go. So I use that on the conference circuit. So I apologize to everyone in advance, because they've probably heard that joke about 10 times on this cast.
I love
anyway. All right. So let's start talking a little bit more about the, I mean, in terms of adaptation, we've talked about that. We've talked about the methodology there, but if the rules change so much, if automation is broadly present, then
they will.
What are the organizing principles? Because, large corporations may not exist in the future the way they do today, because you're not going to need a large human capital, human labor component. You could, let's take a bank. I use this illustration in the banking stuff. I talk about JP Morgan Chase, an organization with 160,000 employees today in 80 countries or whatever it is. And they could be 5,000 employees in the future and a whole bunch of algorithms and autonomous infrastructure. So the reality is we may not have these massive corporations with who are employing massive employee sets unless it's sort of climate mitigation and state-driven sort of adaptation, which is going to require massive infrastructure
coordinated efforts, right? So I think you just said it interesting. So, like for the traditional companies, we're flipping the pyramid, right? It becomes more stacked at the top than the bottom. I have a son who's 23, and the recent reports that came out that said half of the entry-level jobs will be gone is a paralyzing thought to them, right? Like, oh my gosh, that'll all be gone. So there'll only be jobs at the top. But how do you get to the top if you've never done the work? Do you know what I mean? So I think there's going to be a whole bunch of that going on. But I really wonder if we go back to one of two things, the Hollywood studio model, which is my favorite always. You're always bringing the band back together with the best talent. So the people that are, they're individuals with the best talent, they're brought into the best team. So the people that are the most qualified win. Right. So that's a good organizing principle. And the other one is you still have big organized groups that have to do a lot of thinking work, not doing work around big problems like climate change. So, but the traditional structure like JP Morgan Chase, I don't know why you would support that kind of overhead. It's not necessary, right?
No,
it won't be.
I mean, this is the thing I talk about the fact that we won't recognize a bank in 20 or 30 years, in 2050, right? What you call a bank then will not bear any resemblance to the banks of the days of Medici. Yeah, even today, right? With wallets and everything.
Well, my joke is, the misused quote, which was, Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? But my joke is that, there was research in the 1970s and the states that said, how do you want to improve your bank? And people said the number one way you could improve this bank is more tellers. Yeah. And nobody said, when you read the research, because people don't know, right? No one said, I want my money to come out of a wall because it didn't exist. But now you can't imagine it without it. So I think there's going to be a lot of those transformations. We'll just work on bigger problems differently.
All right. So let's talk about, let's sort of, as we sort of close out the show, let's take a journey into the future. We talk about the fact that, 2050 today, we are closer to 2050 than the year 2000. So, we are, and 2050 sounds like science fiction, although 2025 sounded like science fiction when I was a kid, right? So
it did in the 80s, that's for sure.
Yeah. No, I laugh about the fact that in the 1980s, I was a fan of Star Trek, the Next Generation, and, the 24th century, one of the greatest technological advances they had was these computers you could carry around on a screen, right? Like, the tablet, the pads, as they call them, personal access data devices, right? Yeah. And now, and then, what was it? It was less than 30 years later, and we had these things. So, sometimes we're not necessarily great at sort of predicting, the sort of the speed of technology. There's great quotes on that as well. But, moving into the world of 2050, let's put your futurist hat on. Describe to me what you think the world is going to be like, and what are some of the problems that we will have killed and got out of the way, and what are some new problems that will present themselves?
So I think some problems that could be killed, right? I think we're going to be able to figure out big industry. I think we're going to be able to figure out affordable housing. Depending on who's in charge, I think we'll be cracking on climate change because we have.
It's not a technology problem, right? It's just policy problem now. We can 3D print homes in 24 hours for $3,000. It's not a technology problem.
Yeah, it's a power problem. That's what that is. But one thing I think we're really going to have to fix now in order to get there, which we haven't talked about, is education. And I mean this globally. And one thing I always like to talk about, which is, in the future, it's going to be the skills you have, not the job you have. That's what I think is going to be different. So we've really got to, schools today are organized around the principle of we are producing future employees. We should be producing future humans. And so we've gotten off track. And
that's the industrial age sort of methodology, right? For the classroom.
And
we want to create obedient and compliant factory drones, but that's not the world we live in anymore.
well, and we wonder why kids are so depressed and there's a mental health epidemic. And I mean, come on, do tests count or not count? Is it all about testing or grades or what is it? Do I get to be a human in an experiment or not? Will it cost me for the future? I mean, these are the calculus these kids have to do. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
I've never understood why we teach kids history, but we don't teach future. So then they get out.
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea behind Elon Musk's Ad Astra school that he built for his kids and so forth. But even that, it's still essentially a classroom model. You work with AI every day. You see its potential to teach you. What about the idea that everyone has their own AI tutor? Why do we need classroom settings at all? Or is it just for like social interactions and storytelling and that sort of training? I don't know.
So I think that's the component, right? Sal Khan, he's been working on this for years, and now his partnership with OpenAI. And if you watch some of that, that's pretty incredible. In terms of how you're able to learn and apply. To me, it's going back to the apprentice model, like with the blacksmith.
Yeah.
It's like you learn by doing. And it's
the master and apprentice.
Yeah. What used to be just we are going to move quickly from just in case learning, which is where we give people all this online learning, to just in time. And that's what AI is going to do for us. So, we're really going to be able to learn things more quickly. I think then it's not a classroom, they're gatherings, and they can be problem solving gatherings. They can be homework and discussion. They might be more philosophical, more reflective, more innovative. And I think that is a much better use of our collaboration. And that's where we're really going to learn a lot of human skills. I think that is going to be a key component, because just like with gaming, you see kids, they're really skilled with gaming, but the social aspect is really what matters around it. So we have to make sure that we still build that in so that kids don't get isolated and think that their AI coach is their friend.
So, if you were applying, and I know you've worked with various elements of the federal government and globally with bodies such as the World Economic Forum, but if you were applying the kill the stupid rule to the future of government based on AI, what do you think government's going to look like in 20 or 30 years?
Oh, that's the one I'm least hopeful for. I mean, I think that, U.S. politics aside right now, which I think is horrific, I think that that is the slowest to move and change by design, by the way, by design, because they have to support so many constituents. But I think really being able to have, let me talk about the United States. I think the principle of Doge was a good one.
Right.
Not the reason why.
Not the execution either, but
not the execution, none of it. But the concept was good. Yeah. Getting rid of government waste, hell yeah. I don't know why we don't have a chief simplifier in every company, in every school, in every government. We need to build subtraction and focus into everything. We need to give people permission for meaning. And I think that's a really important thing, like you said, about meaning in the future. It's subtraction is what starts meaning. And so the thing about Doge was, it's a brilliant idea, but poorly executed because the intent was wrong. And so we've got to get the intent right. So what do I think about government in the future? Unless we get the intent right and the right people in there, we're not going to be solving the biggest problems. We're going to be having people that are in there for power, not problem solving. And that's that's tricky.
So with all the problems that are coming down the pike, but all the potential to solve them, you've talked about the incredible advances we're going to have in healthcare and compute power and all of those things. But, what does society look like? What are your thoughts in terms of, what do we evolve to after capitalism? Or are we already in that in 30 years time, or is it still hanging on? In terms of government, is it autocratic, AI driven? What do you think it sort of tends to look like?
Boy, wow. If only I had a crystal ball. I think AI will play a central role. I think data in governments, data generation and governance is going to be huge, right? I mean, like owning your IP. What do you ring fence and what don't you? Because at some point it's going to be that thing of how do we know what's real and what's meaning? And that's where people are really going to be. What do I think? I think it's going to be more decentralized. I think that people are going to be more skill-based and individual versus this kind of top-heavy, industrial age, as we said. I think if done well, we use our time for thinking, reflection, and more innovative work. However, Humans aren't that fast to adapt. And I think we're just going to find new problems that we wallow in. I don't know what those are yet. I am hopeful for things like education and climate change and healthcare, but humans are humans. They're not shapeshifters. And, when you go back to the basics, there's power, there's struggles. And that's where I think if we could figure out government, like get rid of the waste and people hiding using AI, then it really comes down to it can be a lot smaller, but the only people that are left are the ones that want power. And so we've got to change that structure pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
that's my concern as well. I think we need so much consensus in the world of the future to be able to solve the biggest problems that come up. But consensus is always secondary to sort of the power grab. So that's correct. That's the problem.
But if things are decentralized, maybe that will change it, because we always think that we have to have everything centralized. If things get really a groundswell and are decentralized, we might be surprised at how we fix things, but in 50 different ways, climate change will be fixed rather than everyone agreeing on one. And that's okay as long as it's fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Lisa, it's been great to chat to you, get to know you a bit. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
For people listening, how can they follow your work, your content creation, the work you're doing at FutureThink? What's the best way for them to track Lisa Bodell?
LinkedIn. Definitely link in with me, or they can come and visit my personal site, which is lisabodell.com, or my company at FutureThink. And there's free resources and futurist resources on there for people to take and start learning it themselves, which I really encourage them to do.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. My thanks go out to our team at Provoke Media who help us put together the show each week. Kevin Hersham, Elizabeth Severins and the team. And shout out to JP and Jason, who my co-founders behind Provoke. We will, of course, be back next week with more content from the future. Until then, as we like to say, we'll see you in the future.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.